Right now, somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, there is a cable about the width of a garden hose. It carries roughly a fifth of all internet traffic between the United States and Europe. Financial transactions, military communications, classified government data, your emails, Netflix, banking, all of it, moving through a tube sitting in darkness at the bottom of the sea, held in place by gravity, with no meaningful protection around it. The location of that cable is publicly available online. That's not a metaphor for some abstract vulnerability, that's the literal situation. There are approximately 570 of these cables on the ocean floor right now, collectively carrying 99% of the world's international internet traffic and more than $10 trillion in daily financial transactions. They are the actual physical infrastructure of the global economy. And the precise coordinates of most of them are published because ships need to know where they are to avoid accidentally cutting them with anchors. Russia and China have that map. And according to a former US intelligence official who testified before Congress last month, they are devoting far more resources to figuring out how to use it than America is to stopping them. I'm James Whitmore. 10 cables. 10 vulnerabilities. Here's what's actually at stake. Start with a number that should stop you. $10 trillion. Every day. Not a year. A day. That's the value of financial transactions moving through undersea cables on a typical 24-hour period. The New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, currency markets, derivatives, international wire transfers. All of it moves through fiber optic cables that are, in the most literal sense, lying on the ocean floor waiting. Now here's what makes the threat real rather than theoretical. In September 2025, you probably didn't hear much about this, cables in the Red Sea were cut. The event happened on the night of a lunar eclipse, which is why some people are calling it the Blood Moon Incident. The result, 60% of India's internet connectivity to Europe was disrupted overnight, not slowed. Disrupted. Traffic had to be rerouted through alternative cables, which were suddenly handling load they weren't built for. It took weeks and specialist repair ships to fix. That was an incident that affected India. Now think about what a deliberate, coordinated, multi-cable attack on the cables that serve the United States specifically would look like. The first vulnerability is geography. Undersea cables don't run everywhere uniformly. They concentrate at choke points, narrow geographic passages where dozens of cables run in close proximity because the ocean floor is accessible and the distances are short. The Red Sea is one of them. 16 cables pass through it, connecting Europe to Asia. The Strait of Malacca is another. The Baltic Sea is another. Taiwan Strait. The coastal landing stations where cables come ashore on the US east and west coasts. At each of these choke points, cutting a small number of cables at the same time would have cascading consequences that multiply far beyond the physical damage. The second vulnerability is the fact that these cables are privately owned. They're not military infrastructure. They're built by consortiums of technology companies, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, and telecommunications providers. That means the government has limited direct control over their security. It also means the repair apparatus is private, slow, and limited. There are only about 40 cable repair ships in the world capable of operating at the depths where these cables sit. If multiple cables are cut simultaneously, which is the scenario that keeps security planners awake, the queue for repairs would stretch into months. The third vulnerability is China's position in the cable ecosystem. This is the one that generates the least public discussion and probably deserves the most. HMN Technologies, formerly known as Huawei Marine, is one of the world's largest cable laying and repair companies. It has built or maintained significant portions of the global cable network, particularly in Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. When a cable needs to be laid or repaired, HMN's ships are sometimes the ones that do it, and Chinese-operated cable repair ships have access to the cables themselves during maintenance, at depths and locations that are otherwise unreachable. Washington has been attempting to restrict HMN's involvement in cables that connect US territory. It's partially succeeded, but the global cable network is interconnected. A cable that originates in a US-controlled corridor often passes through zones where HMN has operated, repaired, or maintained infrastructure. The data security implications of that, The possibility of tapping rather than cutting may be as significant as the physical sabotage risk. If that's new information to you, subscribe. This is exactly the kind of geopolitical story that doesn't make the news cycle, but shapes everything underneath it. The fourth vulnerability is Russia's specific capabilities. The Russian naval vessel Yantar is a research ship. That's the official designation. What it actually is a deep-sea intelligence platform equipped with submersibles capable of diving to the depths where undersea cables operate and capable of either tapping them for intelligence collection or severing them. Since 2015, Yantar has been repeatedly observed loitering near critical cable routes in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the North Sea. NATO members have tracked it. Analysts have documented it. The ship keeps doing what it's doing because there is currently no legal mechanism to stop a Russian vessel from sailing in international waters, even if it's hovering over a cable that carries NATO communications. Russia has also been conducting what Swedish intelligence described as a decade-long systematic mapping of critical undersea infrastructure in the North Sea and Baltic Sea. This is not surveillance of military positions. It is surveying of cables, pipelines, and the specific geography of the ocean floor in a way that would be necessary for precision sabotage operations. The Baltic Sea, where 9 of 10 surrounding countries are now NATO members, has experienced multiple suspected cable-cutting incidents since 2022. Most have been attributed to accidental anchor drags by civilian vessels. Some of those vessels have been traced to Russian or Russian-affiliated operators. The legal standard for proving state sabotage versus fishing vessel negligence is essentially impossible to meet. The fifth vulnerability is Taiwan. Taiwan has reported approximately 30 undersea cable incidents in recent years. 30? For a democratic country whose economy is central to the global semiconductor supply chain, including the NVIDIA chips we covered in our last video, cable connectivity is not an abstraction. TSMC's communications, Taiwan's financial systems, and the data connections that make the global tech supply chain function all depend on cables that run through the Taiwan Strait. China's Navy operates in those waters routinely. The infrastructure and the threat to it are essentially co-located. Now here's the thing, nobody's really said clearly about all of this. The cables aren't just an internet problem, they're a military problem. The US military's ability to command forces globally, coordinate with allies, share intelligence in real time, and conduct the kind of networked warfare that American doctrine depends on, all of it runs partly through undersea cables. Satellite communications are a backup, not a replacement. They have lower bandwidth, higher latency, and are themselves vulnerable to anti-satellite weapons. In the first hours of a major conflict, a sophisticated adversary that understood American military doctrine would almost certainly target undersea cables before any other infrastructure, precisely because doing so degrades every American capability simultaneously. A former US intelligence official testified to Congress that a coordinated strike on American undersea infrastructure would simultaneously cut internet access for millions of Americans, freeze financial markets, disrupt military command communications, and create economic chaos that no kinetic weapon could replicate at a tiny fraction of the cost of conventional military operations. The Bipartisan Strategic Subsea Cables Act of 2026, introduced in April by Senators Barrasso and Shaheen, is an attempt to address some of this. It calls for increased investment in cable resilience, better detection systems, and enhanced surveillance of cable corridors. It's a serious piece of legislation. It also comes roughly a decade after the vulnerability was first clearly identified, and the threat has not been standing still. The honest assessment from people who work in this space, and I've read a lot of what they've written, is that the gap between the vulnerability and the protection for it is wide. Not manageable, but concerning wide. Wide in a way that makes the question not whether a major cable incident will happen, but when and how bad the specific geometry of it will be. The cables are there. The map is public. The capabilities exist. The doctrine for using them has been developing for years. What hasn't kept pace is the defensive response. That's the story. 10 cable systems, 10 choke points, trillions of dollars a day, and a threat that China and Russia are, by the assessment of the people paid to watch it, currently ahead of the response to. The next chapter of this story is probably already being written somewhere on the ocean floor. This is James Whitmore. I'll be back when it surfaces. Subscribe so you're there when it does.